and welcome to IBM Bi-Weekly, a podcast focused on the technical aspects of the IBM I operating system and the community surrounding it. My name is Josh. Today is the 3rd of June 2019, and I have episode 7 in store for you. Tim Rowe from IBM will be joining us today to discuss application development on IBM I, along with a few other topics. Speaking of the topics, we'll cover the agenda really quickly. Today, we'll be discussing with Tim about the RFE process, some application development strategy for IBM I, the advantages and disadvantages of using IBM I for web application solutions, open source software, and even IBM I cloud offerings. So there's a lot in this episode, so stay tuned to hear about all that. With that, we'll just jump into the sponsorship spotlight for this episode. This episode is sponsored by the Omni User Group. We'd like to thank them for sponsoring. They're a group based in Chicago, and you can visit their website, omniuser.org. That's OMNIUSER.org. Omni meets every third Tuesday in the Chicago area. Check out the website for upcoming speakers and dinner meetings. They're pretty cool. That's it for the sponsorship. Thanks again to the Omni User Group for sponsoring this episode. Without much else to talk about, there's no news to cover or anything, so we'll just jump right into the discussion with Tim Rowe. Thanks for listening. Welcome, Tim, to IBM Bi-Weekly. We always open up just with an introduction question of who are you and what do you do at IBM?
Who am I? Thanks, Josh. It's really fun to be here. Who am I is always an interesting question. So, Tim Rowe, my title is the Business Architect of Application Development and Systems Management for the IBM I operating system. So that's my title. Well, what does that actually mean? It's a great question. It means that I get to work with our customers and our development team to make certain that the operating system, from a development perspective, has the things in it we need to continue to be successful well into the future, as well as working with our system administration folks to ensure that the tooling that we have to manage and access the IBM I meets the needs of our users and systems administrators.
Okay, that's very cool. So with that in mind, does that mean that you have a lot to do with the RFE process?
Yeah. A lot of what we do is driven through that RFE process. The application development side, for example, we've been using the RFE process there for many, many years prior to the IBM I world moving to RFEs, because before we had IBM I in RFE, the Rational team, which is where our RPG, COBOL compilers, as well as our Rational developer for iTooling lived, that organization used RFEs. And so we had lots of RFEs that were in that space as our developers helped us understand what they needed to do a better job with developing high-quality applications in their environment, in their businesses. And then as we've moved on, we continue to get lots of RFEs for both the web middleware, some of the core pieces of the operating system, as well as many of our systems management tools. And so we really depend upon that information to help us understand what's going on in the minds of our customers.
Yeah, that's really cool. I actually didn't realize that it had been used internally for a long time before it went public.
Well, it was actually public with the RDI and RPG stuff. It just was only that little piece. And then we expanded to allow the entire IBM I operating system to now also participate.
I see. Okay. Yeah. Very cool. So actually, do you mind, is it possible for you to walk us through the process of accepting and implementing an RFE?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Obviously, the first step is somebody has to write one.
Right. Yeah.
That's the first thing. And this is one of those things, I love it, as I have had a great opportunity to travel the world and talk to our customers. And I love when I'm in a session and somebody goes, this has been bugging me for years. Can we do this? And I'm like, well, have you ever let us know?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, no. Well, my mind reading skills are pretty poor. So having that RFE is really a key thing for both myself as well as the many teams that I get the opportunity to work with. Um, the teams that we have here, I mean, we have some incredibly sharp developers, but a lot of our developers don't actually have to use IBM I. They don't actually write applications for IBM I. They write plumbing. And so, to help understand what the user needs, we need these ideas. Now, once an RFE is written, then having the community weigh in on its benefit, its importance, by voting, adding more comments. It's not necessarily that we're looking for them to solve the problem, but
Right.
we're looking for them to weigh in the importance of the issue. What business problem is this going to solve? Um, so that's obviously a factor to us. We've had some RFEs that have had. I think the RFE that had the most votes in my area, I had one for ACS for uh, more native based printing. So it was the JPS printing support that we added. We had, I don't know, 250 votes for that. And the community, specifically the community in Japan, made it very clear to us that even though this was an incredibly difficult issue for us to solve, we needed to invest in it and we needed to solve it. But they made that very clear by respond. I think it was social media that you know ramped up the count, but either way, it was clear. Others of them get done because a developer happened to be already in that code, and oh yeah, this is an easy one. I can get it done in an afternoon, and so we'll deliver those kind of RFEs. And so there's a balance between the importance for business, the impact for the community, and the amount of effort required. And those are the things that I get the opportunity to look at and balance as we prioritize what our teams are going to be working on from a development perspective.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yes, that was good. Now, I'm curious if you're able to and allowed to describe the application development strategy for IBM I at all, as in maybe
Oh yeah,
like
I
yeah.
talk about the strategy for application development all the time. Matter of fact, I had a session this morning, bright and early, with a group of our business partners in India, and they they work with many customers that have applications, and so they need to understand what is the strategy, what are we trying to do, so that they can help make certain that their IBMI customers are following our path. I like to think of the strategy for application development in a very, very simple term. My strategy is to make development on IBMI normal.
Mm-hmm.
Now you know,
All right.
right?
That's perfect.
And you think about development being normal. Um, you're somebody who's been trained actually in development in the not
Right.
so distant past, fairly recently. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's certain things that are taught in today's world of development that are very different than, maybe when I had my computer science classes back a day or two ago. Um, and so we need to make certain, and obviously the IBMI, which has got a history of over, we're pushing 31 years now. We've spanned many different disciplines and many different ideas and technologies within the realm of development. And so we're continuing to look at that to not only just add new things, but how do we transform what we have so that developers who have been trained recently can adapt and prosper using some of the more let's call them legacy type applications or methodologies, but being able to transform them into something that they would consider normal. And that means both languages, tools, connectivity, source control, any of those kind of things are the areas that we continue to look at and ensure that we are headed in that right direction. I mean, the simplest example is, well, there's two that come easily to mind. One is just all the open source things that we've added to the platform. I mean, you can't get
Mm-hmm.
a lot more normal than some of that stuff, right?
Right. Yeah. Very exciting part of it, actually. I'm glad to hear that you're going in that direction. I don't know why I haven't paid attention enough to hear that yet, but
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at even what we did with the RPG language, thankfully, when I say we, I mean IBM and the IBM I community. That's who owns the RPG language.
right.
And because we have that type of an ownership model, we, being again the community, through RFEs, conversations, requirements, those kind of things, as well as us here in the development lab, get the opportunity to move RPG into normal. And
Yeah, like free format and such.
I don't like to call it free format because honestly, we've had free format for a very long time.
Right. That's true.
I like to call it modern RPG because
Yeah, just the standard.
modern RPG includes fully free form as well as moving from monolithic to modular, self-documenting code.
Oh,
Again,
right.
all that stuff that we think of as normal development.
Mm-hmm. Correct. All right. Well, you touched on a little bit about training in there, and how people have been trained. I was curious and had this question early on, but kind of skipped it. What's your background and what got you into IBMI?
Um, so I have I think a rather humorous background in many respects. Um, I wasn't really a big student growing up. I went to college, didn't do particularly well in classes. I thought I wanted to be a history teacher until I took a history class and didn't do very well. And then I thought, well, maybe like chemistry would be fun. And I didn't do very well in that class. And, math teacher, I didn't do well in math classes, but all part of those classes, you had to take some, intro to computer science, and oh, hey, look at that. I got an A+ in that class. Maybe I should think about that. And the reason that I love computers, I love what I do. One of the things has always been one of my strengths is fixing things and solving problems, logic, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what got me into this. That's what I love doing it. And that's sort of my background in that respect, is that I have a computer science degree from ages gone by, and then I've got multiple masters in the school of experience,
Oh, very cool.
if you
And
will.
then what shifted you into IBMI?
Actually, I started out of college. I accepted a job at an insurance company doing mainframe assembly level coding because one of my favorite classes in college was assembly
Oh,
coding.
wow.
And then out of the blue, a couple weeks before I was actually going to start at that job, I got this call from a consulting firm out of someplace in Rochester, Minnesota. Actually, they called and said it was in Rochester, and I'm thinking, dang, I love upstate New York. Because I'm originally from Rhode Island, so I grew up just south of
Ah,
Boston. So
I
I'm
see.
an East Coaster. So when I heard this Rochester, I'm thinking, oh, upstate New York is a beautiful part of the country.
Yeah, it is.
And so they asked me to, they're like, well, it's not mainframe, but it's mid range. It's it's AS400, and I'm like, no clue, never heard of the thing. Granted, AS400 was less than a year old at that
Ah,
time, so it wouldn't be something that I'd heard of much. But it was operating system code. It was operating system development, and
that sounds fun.
that intrigued me. And so, my wife and I decided to come out to Rochester for a year or two just to kind of, uh, this is the time to go on an adventure. And sort of never left.
Yeah, sounds like it. Yeah, I've been there ever since, huh?
Yeah.
Well,
Had
that's exciting.
yeah,
I don't think I'd be able to turn down an operating system position either. That's
yeah.
pretty cool.
And so I've had a very fortunate career in that, I've worked on many different layers of the operating system, you know, lots of stuff within the work management and kind of stuff. I was fortunate to run one of the key testing teams when we did the IMPI to risk migration back ages ago.
Oh, wow.
That was
Wow.
that was
You
one
were
of the
part of
fun
that,
jobs.
huh?
Yeah, I
That's
actually
very
I
cool.
had a testing organization. I had a testing team that had about 18 machines at its peak, and our goal was to run the machine at 100% CPU to see if we could make it fall over.
All
And
right.
and we did make it fall over many
Good job.
times. But of course, that was a good thing because by the time we were done, it was in much better shape before it went out the door.
That's neat to hear, though. I was studying about risk, so
Yeah.
that's neat to hear it from someone that was part of it.
Yeah.
Um, so now to get a bit more specific on IBMI applications, as I've been doing web application development for a while, and I had a constituent reach out with this question. As a web application developer, what are the chief advantages and disadvantages of choosing to host my solution on IBMI as opposed to other platforms?
Oh man, there's some really great advantages.
Hmm.
One, it's just purely the integrated nature of everything. So
Which is the I, right?
yeah, I mean the fact that you have your database, you have you can have your application servers, your web servers, your security, all of that in one partition. You actually get far better resource management, for example. So if I were to think about multiple partitions or multiple LPARs, if I'm running on some other platform, I might have an application server on one VM, um, as well as database servers. I can have application servers. You can have all these different VMs, each hosting its own server, and each one of those VMs has to have its own set of processor and memory, and they don't necessarily share as well as they would on where I have one VM, and that one VM can now share all of those resources. So you get a benefit and a cost savings benefit just from that shared resource perspective. The other thing that people often overlook is if I come into my web server, when I make a request from the web server into the data or into the application server or into some core backend, all of that communication is done via some kind of a network request. Even on IBMI, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's a separate
Right.
network request. Um, Now, that network request, if I'm running on IBMI, doesn't leave the TCP stack. I don't need to encrypt anything. It's also
Oh,
much faster because it stays on the TCP stack. So right there, that's a huge benefit that people often fail to realize. The
that's
now
one I didn't know.
the other now benefit, um, if you do any kind of Java based development, right? With the industry, what's going on in the industry these days with uh, a certain other company that owns Java charging for the usage of things like that, having your Java applications run on IBMI, you are now using the IBM Java. You're not,
Oh,
so
right.
you don't care. You don't care about whatever news is going on outside of this world. All of your support costs are all part of your normal IBMI support statement, and you get the latest updates.
Well,
So,
that's
so
fantastic.
that's another uh, item to keep in mind if you're doing things in the world of Java. And on IBMI, you can run Tomcat and get support for it. You can run what we call our integrated application server, which is if you will, a flavor of Tomcat that's created by IBM that's based on Liberty. And we integrate the Liberty server into the operating system.
That's very cool. I haven't messed with Java, so I wasn't aware of all of those things. So that's good to hear. Um, Are you able to think of any disadvantages versus others?
Well, the disadvantages continue to get less and less. Um, with with the new changes that we've done in the open source space, specifically moving from things like OPS to RPMs and Yum, which I'm sure you're going to ask questions about coming up. But
Yep.
but
Yep.
with those kind of changes, right now, again, we've moved into normal for our developers, and it's no longer nearly as difficult to get these environments on the box. It's drop it on, you're on your IBM I, and it's much easier to have the environments ready to go.
Right. Right. That was a disadvantage that's been cured so
Oh,
far.
I couldn't agree more. Now,
Yeah, that was one of my biggest gripes. And
but here's the flip side to this, right? For you, it was a disadvantage. I would
Mhm.
readily agree for you, and when I say you, I mean somebody who's a younger developer, because you know RPMs, you know Yum.
Right.
For some of my system administrators that have been working on IBM I for 20 years, they're at a disadvantage now.
This is true. They're
Because
used to their license programs and PTS.
they're used to PTFs, and we just moved the cheese. Now, still, even in that space, the RPMs and Yum, I think, are a far simpler and far easier way to deal with this stuff.
Right. And
But
the learning
it's a
curves
learning curve. It's a change.
is not bad though.
Yeah, it's a change.
And speaking on that topic, actually, we are going to shift the next little bit of the talk over to that. You obviously had a hand in bringing the open source software to IBM I with Yum through ACS. Um, would you describe that as an exciting project, opening the IBM I platform to all the RPMs out there?
Well, my original involvement with open source on IBM I actually has to go back a little bit further, because I was part of the team that brought the Apache server to
Oh,
IBM I.
very cool.
So
Very
that was
cool.
one of the first open source projects that I got to work on, which was, yeah, very cool, and we were really excited about that. And then, I've been in the web middleware space for, years since then, with the SOAP-based web services server, and then the REST API stuff that we have. And then when we had the opportunity to bring Node.js to the platform, we were like, we need a way to get Node.js delivered. And that first initial version of Node.js, it was like our customers, well, first off, we didn't have Yum, or we didn't have RPMs that worked on I at that point in time. It hadn't been invented for I yet. So we needed to get something, and that's why we created the 5733 OPS option and PTFs, which were a normal to IBM I people delivery mechanism. I mean, really, a PTF is an RPM. They're the same thing. It's a package that contains software. And apply PTF and load PTF, that's really no different than Yum. It's just, different.
Right,
So
right. It's a different
it's a
interface, but
different,
what
absolutely.
happens in the background is the same.
There's some definite some similarities, so that's where we started with all this. And so the fact that we were able to, Jesse and his team were, incredibly instrumental in getting RPMs and Yum on the platform, and then to be able to take that interface and build a ACS interface over the top of that.
Hmm.
I know Jesse spent a few weekends slapping that together to put, to make that all happen. But being able to take that and put that into ACS, I think, has been very, very important, because, ACS is our strategic platform for many aspects
Oh, definitely.
of
Yeah.
managing and accessing the box. And so to be able to have the open source RPM component over that really makes
That.
things easier for the
Mhm.
non-Yum based developer.
Oh, that was a genius strategy to put that into ACS. I agree. Um, I don't think it would have been nearly as adopted if it hadn't have been.
Yeah, I mean, for somebody like, I get Yum. I know how it works. Yeah, I can copy and paste stuff, but yeah, I don't need to remember. I don't want to have to remember what the Yum
Of course.
command line is. I mean, I'd much rather say, oh, hey, look at this. Click button. I have all my packages. Life is
Yep.
good.
Yep. Yep. I agree. I even, not to go too much on a tangent, but I'm very happy that Jesse and team have been creating the group RPMs, like the developer group RPM and stuff, where you can install it and it installs all the software you need for a development environment.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, that's really nice of them to do that for the people out there that aren't familiar with this newer type of development yet.
Mm-hmm.
So, talking about Yum and RPMs, I've noticed that the transition from the license program OPS to Yum has obviously accelerated the delivery of software exponentially. I mean, it's
Yeah,
ramped it up tremendously,
yeah, that's an
which is a
understatement.
fantastic thing. Yeah, I mean, it is an understatement. We can go over the details, but it was a tremendous jump from just like a dozen software to hundreds within a few months.
Yeah, I think we were sitting at 37 when we rolled out Yum a year and a
Yeah.
half ago, and now we're sitting at about 300.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's crazy, but which is a fantastic thing. But it's still everything is curated through IBM at the moment. Third-party repositories can exist, and they do. I have one that delivers my dot files, um, but I found it's a little unique to IBM I in that there's not many third parties, and I chalk that up to the availability of the platform.
No,
There's been
I'm gonna disagree with you on that. Before you go, I
okay,
we can talk about availability of the platform, but
sure.
I wouldn't count the fact that there's not third party to that. The reason that we don't have as much third party repositories is because IBM customers in general won't put those on.
Well,
There are many, and again, because of the nature of our platform, which is a platform for enterprise business, there are many companies that will only put on software that's from some, you know, in many cases, they'll only put on software from IBM or from some third party ISV that they've purchased. And
well,
that's one of the key pieces to that, at least
I
at this
yeah,
point.
and I agree with that sentiment, but I don't know if that's a detriment from someone creating their own third party repository and delivering some software just because they think that maybe people want to adopt it. For example, if I had access to an IBMI that wasn't a client's, which I don't really, I would happily provide a PHP RPM in my repository, but I don't have a box right now that I could test on. Regardless of if I think many people would adopt it or not, I'd still like to provide one because I'd like to use one.
Sure, sure.
Uh,
But and while that's fantastic, and we would love to be able to do something along those lines. I mean, at this point right now, we've only had RPMs and repositories out there for a very short period of time, and
that's true.
one of the it's been a year and a half, right? And in
Right.
our community is very conservative, and especially
Very
when you
true.
start talking about um, some of the financial institutions that we have, whether that's banking, insurance,
Hmm.
healthcare, they absolutely will refuse to allow
Of course.
software, even from somebody as reputable as you, on their box. So that's
Understandable.
so I think as we continue to grow in this space, I think we're going to see more potential third parties and more opportunities in this space.
Of course.
Um, and that kind of leads us into the availability that you want to
Right.
discuss. And now that whole availability world continues to change and evolve. It was just in February of this year that we had the very first announcement from IBM about having a cloud offering for
Yes.
IBMI.
It is becoming more and more available. I will say that, especially from what I saw 5 or so years ago.
Yeah, well, there was nothing there. You had to either
Right.
purchase, or you had to purchase something from an MSP that would give you a partition. So you could do it, but it wasn't the cloud based model where you had self-provisioning, and I could go spin up a partition for a couple of hours and move on. And while it's been announced, the IBM Cloud support, there's some support from SkyTap that I believe should be already just recently made available, and the other IBM Cloud through Power VM based support will be coming available. My understanding is sometime in the next month or so.
That's cool.
So again, now that we have actual cloud availability, somebody could very easily go get a partition for a day and be able to do the testing that they want to do in an affordable manner.
That's true. Okay. So
I know you still want free.
Well, not necessarily. I'm curious about everything that you mentioned there. These cloud offerings are still all going to be through third-party vendors, right?
No. They're through IBM.
Okay, there is. Okay,
it's
they are
IBM
through
Cloud.
IBM. Thank you. That's the clarification.
It's IBM Cloud.
So it's still through IBM. So could there potentially be, or have there even been talks of a potential like developer spin up or something like that?
Well, that is one of the actual themes that has been put together for this IBM Cloud.
Very cool.
And the reality is, there's many businesses that they're going to run their core business on prem and for various reasons, but their development team, they still need partitions to be able to do development and test.
Right.
And being able to go, spin up a test partition for an afternoon or 3 days or for a 3-week period is incredibly enticing, and I think going to be very, very useful for our IBMI development community.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So
that is in the works right now.
Oh, that's absolutely part of this whole
the whole plan.
The whole plan. Yeah.
Fantastic to hear. That gives me a lot of hope. Okay. Well, then that section actually went much better than I thought it was going to.
Well, I wasn't worried about that section because I thought based on what we've been doing here in the last 6 months, we actually have a good story that we can start to share now. Now, last year we didn't have that good of a story, but this year we do, because the one thing that people often forget is the development lab here in Rochester, we don't sit still.
You really don't. It's a very active development team for sure.
I love those people that say, oh yeah, I tried Java on IBM I and it was terrible. Oh, okay. When did you try it? Oh, it was on a Power 4 box.
Oh, goodness.
Right? And I'm like, yeah, I agree. Java on IBM I on Power 4 sucked. Move on. We're not that anymore. We actually have an incredibly finely tuned Java that runs really well on Power 8 and Power 9. It's amazing the performance you can get out of that silly stuff. So yeah, the world has changed a lot in short periods of time, both with things like tooling and languages and performance of languages, and our cloud story. Heck, and our availability story with things like DB2 Mirror.
Oh, definitely. That was an exciting thing to hear. So anyway, I think we've spent a lot of time on this and it was a fantastic talk. So we'll wrap up with a quick fun question of what do you do for fun, and what are your hobbies or passions?
Fantastic question. So for many of the last few years, I have 4 kids, so the world's revolved around some of chasing them around. I've been very active in the space of soccer. I've either coached my kids or have parented my kids. I watched them play games. Last year, my youngest son and I took up reffing. So he and I are both FIFA certified soccer referees. So we spend our time when he's not playing and I'm not watching him play, giving back to the soccer community in the area and reffing games. Matter of fact, I had a game last night and have a game tonight, so it should be quite fun. I figure, what better way to get exercise than to have somebody pay you? I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
It's great. So that's been a part of my life here in the last year or two. I also spent lots of time fixing things. I work on my own cars. I've built things. I've
Oh, neat.
built half my house back a few years
So
ago.
you're a tinkerer.
Yeah, I am.
I know the feeling.
So yeah, and I spent about 30 years as a sound engineer, as well on the side. My family is quite musical. My wife is a keyboardist. I have a son who is working as a worship pastor at a church in Phoenix, and so I've spent quite a bit of time doing. As I don't play an instrument, I get to mix them playing instruments. It was great fun.
Oh, I see. I was actually Alan told me to ask you about music.
Yeah,
Uh,
a
so
matter
that's
of fact,
funny that you mentioned that.
somebody was what was it, an event in Ocean last year, I believe.
Ah,
He played a little ditty with it was him and Charlie and
yeah.
um, oh, what's her name from
Steph?
Steph, yes.
Yep, yep,
Yeah,
yep.
names. They did a little ditty and I helped with the microphones and made it sound actually pretty
I
good.
get it.
So yeah, that was fun.
I see. The very cool music technician. All right. Well, it was fantastic to have you on the podcast. That was a great interview. And so we'll just wrap it up at that.
Well, fantastic. Thanks again for pulling me in and let me know when we can chat again.
For sure.
Okay.
Well, that sure was an exciting discussion packed full of information from Tim Rowe. It's nice to be assured by Tim about the direction of the Rochester team. I was really happy to hear that. Shout out to the Rochester team, by the way. They're the real MVPs of the platform. I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Tim will most likely end up being a repeat guest in the future. If you haven't already, please be sure to follow us on your favorite social platforms. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. I might be missing something, but you can check the website for all our social media if you want to follow us and stay up to date with everything. Other than that, thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode.